Benesch. Everyone knows Susanna is the founder and director of the Dangerous Speech Project at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. And this is an interdisciplinary research center focusing on hate speech and in particular dangerous speech, which we'll know as Susan will explain, they are different. Also focus on disinformation, in particular as exacerbated by social media, and focusing on ways of combating it without infringing on free speech. And counter speech is a key question at the forefront of Susan's research, and especially in the context of issues pertaining to governance of online content, media democracy and public discourse, and technology and law. So, Suzanne, it's a great honor to have you with us today. And the title of your talk is Put It on a Billboard, Contrarian Responses to Hate Speech. The floor is yours.
It is, on the contrary, my honor and pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you. Just one thing, the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard and the Dangerous Speech Project are two separate hats that I wear. I certainly wouldn't mind if Berkman Klein chose to slurp in the Dangerous Speech Project, but for now they are separate, so I don't want to mislead anybody. I am mindful of that gong, and so I will briefly offer you some ideas, some findings, and some provocations for your own work, I hope, and then look forward to your questions. My topic, as you know, is responses to hatred online, for which many researchers have been using the term counter speech. In the literature, counter speech is generally understood as an attempt to suppress the content to which it responds by persuading the author to stop posting it, or very commonly, of course, by shaming them. I'm distinguishing here between persuading someone to voluntarily stop posting and shaming them or harassing them into stopping. My colleagues and I have been studying civil society responses to online hate now for 2 or 3 years, and we found that some responses are more complex, more interesting, and even, believe it or not, a bit more encouraging than the simpler, familiar description of counter speech that I just mentioned. So I'm going to outline 3 of our findings and then illustrate them with some examples of actual responses to hatred that we have come across online. The first point is that responses to hatred are considerably more varied than counter speech. People have come up with a variety of ingenious, contrarian methods for responding. In this brief talk, I'll make just 2 points about those, although we identified 7 different, as we call them, communicative strategies for responding to hatred. The first of the 2 points I will make, mindful of time, is that we have learned to distinguish between counter speech for shaming, of course, very abundant, and counter speech for education, which exists. Second, we have found that some responders to hatred don't try to suppress hateful content at all, contrary to another common assumption in much of the literature. In fact, some responders deliberately amplify the awful content to which they are responding. I'm going to show you 2 examples of that. The second point I wanted to make is that the goals of people who respond to hatred are different from what most researchers investigate. Researchers often test for change in the online behavior of the author of hateful content. All the responders we've interviewed, by contrast, think they're very unlikely to convert people they perceive as haters. And that's generally not their objective. Instead, they are most interested in influencing the ideas and behavior of what we call the audience, the invariably larger or much, much larger group of people who observe both online hatred and responses to it. And of course, if you were hoping to shift discourse norms, you'd be much more interested in the latter, along with the people who are attempting to do it. The third point is that norm change may indeed be happening in response to counter speech and other responses to hatred online in different ways from the ones that we at least imagined. For example, significant behavior change may happen even if no one's opinions change. Instead, collective efforts to respond to hatred can lower inhibitions against posting constructive counterspeech among people who wouldn't dare to post when they thought they were doing it alone. We all know a lot about disinhibition that leads people to post offensive and even damaging content. Much less attention has been paid to disinhibition that leads people to post more constructive content that might shift discourse norms away from hatred. This is really the point that Cass just made, after all, that the same processes can work regardless of the normative content, right? Okay, now I'd like to show you some examples. Come on. Can you see that? Terrific. Okay. So that's just the title slide. This is one of the notable projects in which hatred was deliberately amplified. In this case, it was plastered in huge letters on billboards, hence the title of my talk. When an Afro-Brazilian woman TV journalist, Maria Julia Coutinho is her name, her nickname is Maju, was promoted to a more visible job in 2015, that was met with a surge is perhaps not even a sufficient word, a geyser of blatant online racism. Some of it was directed at her personally, and plenty was aimed at Black Brazilians in general, or Black people in general. A human rights organization worked with an advertising agency to identify racist comments online, and then they put them on billboards near the homes of the authors of the posts. Notably, and very unusually, they chose to omit the names and faces of the authors, thereby protecting them from the dog piles to which they would otherwise have been undoubtedly subject. Each billboard also carried the slogan that you can see here at the bottom of this billboard: virtual racism, real consequences. The people who made this campaign said, we just wanted to raise awareness and start a discussion in order to make people think about the consequences before posting this kind of comments on the internet. Because after all, the worst enemy of racism is silence. And they also use the slogan, you can't stop racism without facing it. So, you know, this is of course a highly controversial decision. They have not only, if you like, forwarded the content, they have literally amplified it. And in fact, I was careful to include as little as possible in my slides following Michaela's thoughtful, request that we not subject you as an audience, we, people talking at this workshop, not subject you, the audience, to such content. Obviously, the circumstances are totally different, but I want to draw your attention to the mindful decision on the part of the people who made this campaign. In fact, they interviewed quite a few people standing in the street near the billboards and asked them what they thought about them. And one of them said, we like to tell ourselves that our society isn't racist, but this forces us to face the fact that it isn't true. I think I'll quickly play you this little video clip and you'll see someone else make a similar comment. This is from a small video made to describe the campaign. That's the human rights organization.
Chama atenção o racismo, que a gente nem se lembra dele, que é tão lugar comum.
So it's already become a routine, is I think an important comment. This guy's trying to say that racism online is familiar, is common, is I think tacitly accepted by lots of people since it is so common. And of course, this project was attempting to disrupt that. Unfortunately, there was no rigorous study of its effects, or in fact, no systematic study of its effects. I think it would be tremendously interesting and important to do something like that. Mindful of time, let me go on to another project. More Than Mean is another effort, another project that deliberately repeated and amplified hateful content. As you know, women are often attacked online, especially women who speak up in spaces or in roles where some men think women don't belong. Oops, sorry about that. Has to do with the 2-year-old, even though she isn't present. Anyway, sorry. Women sports journalists are one striking example of women who get particularly viciously attacked online, receiving violent threats and hatred. In response to this, a team of film producers collected hateful remarks that people had actually sent to 2 women sports journalists, and then recruited male volunteers to sit on a Spartan stage across from the women who had received those messages. Those men had not sent the messages and had never seen them before. Of course, the women had. Those male volunteers were then asked to read the messages to the women. Therefore, it's the men who become deeply uncomfortable in the film and beg the off-screen director to let them stop, which makes me wonder whether here the viewer is spurred to feel empathy with the man and not with the woman, which raises all, or with a man more than with a woman, or as much as with a woman, which raises all kinds of interesting questions. I'm going to show you a brief excerpt from that video that they made, which has been seen more than 1 million times. It got quite a bit of uptake.
I'd like to start a petition for a ban on all links to Julie DeCaro's Twitter feed.
Okay. Sarah.
All right, you ready to do some mean tweets?
I'm ready.
Sarah Spain sounds like a nagging wife on TV today.
Not even married yet.
Julie DeCaro is a run-of-the-mill, mediocre beat writer. Not atrocious, not good.
Just sort of there.
I'm actually not a beat writer at all, but okay.
Sarah Spain is just a scrub muffin.
I don't even know what a scrub
I don't
is.
either.
I love muffins.
One of the players should beat you to death with their hockey stick like the whore you are.
I'm just reading this.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm going to stop it there because I think you've already got the idea. The comments get worse and worse. The men become increasingly uncomfortable and begin to beg not to repeat the language they're seeing on the screen. And of course, the off-screen producer tells them to continue. In this sense, it's almost a strange echo of the Milgram experiment. And again, I think a very interesting contrarian way of trying to shift people's views. Unfortunately, we don't know to what extent this kind of method actually does shift views or shift discourse norms. I confess that I'm showing these to you in the hope that you or someone else you know will become seized with this idea and help to study it. Let me go on. Groups of now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about counter speech, particularly when it is conducted on a large scale, since I offered you some findings and some ideas regarding that from our studies of civil society responses to hatred. Groups of counter speakers often form ad hoc, of course. Those are the cases that are most publicized. You know, this is something like the famous old case of Justine Sacco, the woman who traveled to South Africa and tweeted something very offensive about her fear that she would get AIDS since she was in South Africa. She also tweeted offensively about British people and about Germans. A gigantic, what we now call dog pile, formed against her. And in fact, there was such a disturbing, in my, that's me editorializing, disturbing to me, desire to see her suffer on the part of the people who are attacking her, that some of those people sought someone in South Africa who could go to the airport ready with a camera to photograph her after she landed, at the moment when she turned on her phone and saw that her life had been wrecked, at least for the moment. So there is in those kinds of responses to hatred, there is a keen desire for revenge and, frankly, to see the other person suffer in lots of cases. So that's what we are, I think, most familiar with. However, groups of counterspeakers also come together not reactively, not spontaneously, but systematically and continually responding to hatred together. There are far more people doing this than you might realize. They are many more than 100,000 by our count. The biggest case, as far as we know, is, with apologies to anyone who speaks Swedish for my mispronunciation, Jaggerhär. It is, this means I am here. This organization is notable not only for its size and for its rather strict rules governing the sort of content that one may post, but also for the fact that it's been replicated in many other countries. So now there are sister organizations, all named I am here in the relevant language, in Germany, in fact, in Australia, in Canada, in France, in Finland, Norway, Slovakia, India, the United States, and the UK, among others. Members are directed to post in particular comment threads on Facebook containing hateful speech. So they counterspeak together, and they make their own comments much more visible by liking each other's comments so that they will rise in the comment thread. In this way, they are taking advantage of a Facebook algorithm. The group was founded by the woman you see here on the slide. Her name is Mina Benesch. She is Swedish. She immigrated to Sweden with her family from Iran when she was a child, and was so alarmed at the surge of hatred online in 2015 that she founded Jaggerhär in early 2016. I should mention another very notable thing about this group is that it's still going years after its founding. Most of the projects or efforts to respond to hatred online that we have discovered, ingenious and interesting though they are, have not lasted very long. They have, in most cases, been one-off projects like Mirrors of Racism and More Than Mean, the ones that I've showed you so far. But I Am Here continues to operate in many countries, and this durability is one reason why my colleague Kathy Berger has done an ethnographic study of dozens of the most active members of the Swedish group. And that has been exceedingly interesting. From that, we learned, as I mentioned, that the goal, without exception, of the members of these groups is to influence the behavior and even the ideas of the audience, i.e. to shift discourse norms. So again, it in our view, really bears some further study. I would, and so here are the logos of some of the other groups. I would feel remiss if I didn't mention to you also this German effort in which has been studied, and here is the reference to the relevant paper. The authors collected over 9 million tweets originating from two competing online groups, competing in the sense that one was posting quite a lot of what I think all of us would consider hatred, and the other group was explicitly formed to counter that one. They're called Reconquista Germanica and Reconquista Internet. RG is a highly organized hate group aimed to specifically to disrupt political discussions, interestingly, and promote the right-wing populist nationalist AfD party. And RI, Reconquista Internet, was formed, as I say, with the explicit goal of countering RG's messaging. And finally, I'd like to show you another reference. This is one of the very few efforts we know of to study whether counter-speech does indeed shift discourse norms, to study the impact of counter-speech, in this case, on anti-Roma speech in Slovakia on Facebook. The study found that counter-speech was not effective for changing the behavior of the user who posted the negative comments about the Roma, not surprisingly. I think any counter-speaker would have predicted that for us. It was, however, followed by an increase in the number of pro-Roma comments within the same comment thread. So this raises, again, the last of the points that I made, which is that you can have a shift in discourse norms, we believe, even if you don't change anybody's ideas. It can, after all, be very difficult to be the first one in a comment thread or a conversation to challenge the prevailing ideas in that online, or for that matter, offline space. There are several reasons for this. One relates to confidence. As you may know, Ray Langton, in her article, Blocking as Counter-Speech, pointed out that in order to fully mentally resist the impact of hateful speech, one must both be confident that they are correct in thinking the hateful speech is wrong, and also overcome the fear of being an epistemic outlier, the odd one out who disagrees. So this is why we think collective responses may be particularly useful. They may, in fact, it is our anecdotal observation in the case of Yogurthed that they bring people out of the woodwork who do agree, but who would not have said so or written so if they didn't feel that quite a few other people were there, both agreeing with them and also potentially protecting them if they are attacked for counter-speaking. I'm a great believer in speaking briefly, and I know that you will have interesting questions, so I think I will stop there for now and listen to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for raising such important questions on the table for us to discuss. I see already some hands. So I see Jenny first.
That was fantastic. It's such an interesting issue, and these are such interesting campaigns. I'm sort of surprised and saddened to hear that they haven't been studied empirically more. And unfortunately, I'm a philosopher, so I can't do it. I don't have the skills.
Hey, all we need is to find somebody, right?
Yeah. But one thing I was thinking would be quite important to look at in doing that would be the nature of the counter speech, because I do remember seeing a study, and I can't remember the reference for it, where like one or two comments on social media criticizing racist speech are well received and make people think, oh yes, that's racist, it's bad. But if you get up to 10 people, then it's seen as mobbing, and it generates sympathy for the person who made the original comment, which is not the effect that anyone wants from this. And I mean, I don't know that, I wonder if it matters quite a lot exactly how the comments are phrased so that they're perceived as, you know, valuable educational contributions rather than bullying and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much for that question. In fact, my last slide was titled counter speech ? Brigading ? And that is one way of framing a similar question. Brigading is a term that emerged on Reddit, which describes what happens when, Reddit is a platform for groups of people who share some kind of interest to find each other and communicate around that interest. And of course, there are innumerable sorts of interests, and there have also been terrible subreddits, as they're called, those groups that have gathered around specific forms of hatred. Brigading is a practice on Reddit, which Reddit has tried to discourage, in which a group of people who disagree with the prevailing view within a subreddit, or who have a notably different identity from the people who prevail on a subreddit, move into that subreddit and try to shift the discourse in their own direction, in one way or another. And of course, this again comes back to Cass's point that the same techniques can be used for good and for ill, for entirely different normative consequences. So sometimes I agree with brigading, and sometimes I don't, according to the views of the brigaders. And this is the problem. We wondered about Jagerher, to be very candid with you, and I even searched out some thoughtful, well-informed Swedes to ask them whether Jagerher is perceived as brigaders, as people who move into a space and take it over, so that anyone who disagrees will not feel comfortable. If they do that, then they are doing something not entirely different from the behavior they're trying to undermine. I can tell you that Mina Dennert, the founder of Jagerher, started the group with, I mentioned, a very strict set of rules. Those rules are designed to keep the comments posted by Jagerher members civil, of course, not including slurs or hatred, since after all, we have seen plenty of counter speech that is hard to distinguish the content to which it responds. They must be civil. They must not attack the person, but instead the idea to which they are responding, not the person to whom they are responding. However, they do attempt to respond in numbers. So you raise a very good point, Jenny, which again needs studying. If the tone of the comments remains sufficiently civil, does it matter how many people jump on that pile?
Yeah, because of course people like to be part of a group all doing a good thing together. Right.
People like to be part of a group doing a bad thing as well. People love to be part of groups. It's one of the fundamental characteristics of people.
True. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, counter-speaking in groups clearly makes it easier for many people to counter-speak who wouldn't otherwise do so. That seems to be a good thing. Yeah. But it's possible that the large numbers also have some sort of harmful effect. We just don't know.
Cool, thank you.
And of course, since there is such a storm of hatred online, it's hard not to be pleased that there are significant numbers of people, sticking their fingers in the dike, so to speak.
Absolutely, I just want it to work, and I'm surprised that this hasn't been studied more.
Well, I'm surprised even at how very little known it is. Never mind studying. I think at the moment there is a kind of collective moral panic about all the awful content online, and so the prevailing view is that the internet is a cesspool. So any contrary news doesn't fit into the paradigm that we've got in our heads. That's my little theory as to why these favorable projects are not better known. And of course, it bears recognizing that they are small and few compared to the geysers of hatred. That's true.
Well, I will say also, I recently wrote a paper about counter speech on the internet in particular. And I found that philosophers had written very little on that topic. There was stuff about counter speech, but it was all modeled on face-to-face interactions, which are extremely different. So I was surprised that gap was there. Anyway, I see other people in the queue, so I'll shut up.
No, it's good discussion. So yeah, I will hopefully come back to this, but I saw Sebastian first, and then Sally.
Yeah, thank you for your talk and your work on counter speech. I find it very, very useful. And yeah, I try to close this gap. Maybe I'm doing some research on the counter speech in direct interaction, and I try to see how these groups, which strategies work and which don't, which evolved more hatefully after the counter speech. And I'm monitoring the German I Am Here group, and
terrific.
There are different opinions about what counter speech is and how it should look like. And this discussion is very interesting from an ethno-methodological point of view, how they use counter speech as a term itself, how they develop. They have really a program of a really, really long list of points, what to do, what not to do. And this is sometimes it leads to more polarization and sometimes maybe also radicalization in the threads. Did you observe something like this during your research? And and when I count the answers of I Am Here, I only find maybe 2 to 5% in a thread. So it's not very dominant. I don't know if it really can shift the discourse norms in such a thread.
Only 2 to 5% of all the comments in the thread are coming from Ich bin here in Germany.
Yeah, so it's work in progress, right? I'm really in the middle of the research, but it's because they don't use the hashtag anymore, so it's hard to identify really so normally they use the hashtag in their comments, to make it clear that they belong to the group, but because they are confronted with so much hate, if they use the hashtag, they stopped using it, and so it's hard to identify, but they are becoming more invisible. I think it's my impression.
It's a very interesting and important sub-issue. We also heard from people in the Swedish group and in fact in the German group about this question of whether to use the hashtag. One interviewee said that I love this, I have to admit, just because of the humanity of it. She said that, and this was some months back, so perhaps it was before more people abandoned the use of the hashtag, but she said, I use the hashtag when I'm willing to follow the rules, but sometimes I just can't bring myself. I can't bear to be as well behaved and civil as the rules require. So I drop the hashtag and I just say what I feel like saying.
Interesting.
Yeah, tremendously interesting. But then, of course, it is not only difficult to identify Ich bin here comments because they lack the hashtag, but I would think it might also be difficult to identify them because they are no longer conforming to a set of group discourse norms that the group was trying to enforce. So at that point, what I would ask, what does it mean that they are members of the group? You know, how different are they then from anybody else who just gets fired up by a particular thread and decides to jump in?
Because they are hardcore users of this group, really members that post to almost any thread they are countering, and some only 1 or 2 times a month.
That's right. We studied only the very frequent participants. We wanted, we had to start somewhere, and we thought that first of all, we really wanted to try to understand them, in part because it seemed so surprising that people would invest so much time in something that is unpaid and probably quite unpleasant, you know, and continue to do it over time and so forth. And they had lots to say about the feeling of solidarity they have in the group. And in fact, some of the groups even use kind of social cohesion techniques, like the Canadian group uses every Wednesday they post kind of happy stories about people who are contributing good things to society, you know. And then another one of the groups has a particular space for, you know, puppies and kittens that members can go and enjoy together. But no, I think, Sebastian, you at this point surely know more about Ich bin here than we do. And I'm so anxious to read your stuff.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. It's really helpful.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So we have another question from Jenny.
Sorry to dominate. If anybody else wants to get, you can. This is so fascinating. I'm so excited about it. The thing that kept occurring to me, thinking about this kind of strategy, was that Hillary Clinton ad, in which she had the small children watching Donald Trump saying hateful things, and all the people like us watching it, they're like, oh my God, that's going to be so effective. You know, that it's devastating. It's horrible. And I thought I had seen things saying, well, actually, that's just what like his supporters like to hear. So it just amplified his voice and didn't do him any harm. But now that you've said there hasn't been study of this, I'm wondering, was that just speculation? I mean, has that ad actually not been studied?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Because it seems like it's a really high profile example of this strategy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, in some of these cases, it would be very difficult to do retroactive study, for example, regarding mirrors of racism. You know, the billboards have been taken down, and so I think it's too late on that one. More Than Mean could still be studied, I think, without any problem. You could show people that video and measure responses without much difficulty. It would be very interesting to study various types of audiences for it. And the same thing with the ad. You wouldn't know what effect it had at the time, but you could study the effect that it can have on various different.
I'm just shocked. I assumed that all of that stuff was being studied in real time by the political psychologists and the campaigns.
I don't know. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It needs to be done.
Indeed. Getting on the ground on empirical. What we found,
if only I had the skills.
What we found, in a way, looking at a Telegram channel, and this is again, a student of ours who worked on the basically filtering and annotating manually the text, is that she would find people kind of who would intervene and try to educate others, like, you shouldn't say this awful things, or and try to kind of change the discourse, as it were. And the reaction was all the time, because they feel much more like we're a bigger group, we're many more of us, it's our group, frankly. Who are you to intrude here? Are you a federal agent or someone who shouldn't belong here? And I find it, quite tricky, because in a way they're just such an echo chamber, this kind of platforms, that it's hard to break in and basically change sensitivities, or even kind of bring a different point of view, or as a reflection or anything. It's just so entrenched.
But in my view, this raises again the question of brigading, and whether it is correct or productive to try to go into a different space where discourse norms are quite fixed, and shift them. It has to do with deeper questions about how the internet should be structured and governed. For example, would it be better to break up Facebook and have lots of smaller social media platforms, each catering to a particular sort of person who wants to have a particular kind of discourse regulated by a different set of norms? That's certainly the way that offline society runs, after all, right? We don't all try to talk to each other across our many lines of differences, of difference. Probably in contemporary society, that's much more not probably, definitely, it's much, much more common for people with very different cultural and normative backgrounds to attempt to converse. And that's part of what's happening online. You know, I have another contrarian view regarding exchanges, painful exchanges online, which is that there is what Dana Boyd and other people have called context collapse very often. I think of it a little bit differently, which is like this. Offline and pre-internet, if somebody wanted to tell a cruel joke about another group, let's say, I'm afraid I often just use the example of a man who wanted to tell a rape joke about women. 30 years ago, he would have told it to a known audience in person, most likely. I'm thinking about an ordinary person, not someone who is used to having a large audience. So stereotypically, please forgive me for all of these generalizations, but maybe he might have told it, I don't know, on a hunting trip or in a men's club or in a locker room. He would have known all of the people who were listening personally. And most likely, again, I'm making some assumptions and generalizations, but it's impossible not to. And probably would have been able to make a decent prediction about how they would take the joke. At least he could have told the joke in a situation in which he knew that no woman would hear it, and probably no man who would disapprove of the joke. Now the descendant of that guy posts that joke on Facebook, and sooner or later some darn woman or some darn man who disapproves of it will see it and complain, and now there's going to be a collision between those people, which we call hateful speech and counter speech. It's painful and unpleasant for both of those people, but over time, what's happening is that the joke teller is being held accountable to a new set of norms in a way that was much less common in the past. And I think we will need to make some rigorous observations over time to see what effect that is really having. It could be ultimately salutary. It reminds me of Thomas Bergenthal, the great Thomas Bergenthal, who I noted that Cass Sunstein mentioned the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Bergenthal makes a very important point, which is that most people in the world, of course, do not enjoy their human rights very much. But an enormous change has happened over the last 50 years, which is that they, in huge numbers, have become aware of the idea that they have human rights and therefore can begin to work toward pressing for compliance with those laws and norms. So if Bergenthal is right that coming into that knowledge is an intermediate step toward finally enjoying the rights, then although the process is very painful, we're going in the right direction. And it is conceivable that that is also happening regarding discourse norms online. Who knows? It's just an idea that I have.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I see a comment from Jenny, if you want to just
No, you should call on David. I've talked enough.
Okay. Okay. David is next.
Hi, David.
Unmute.
Nice
Hi,
to see you,
Susan.
and I'm always
Nice.
looking forward to hearing you. Yeah.
Nice to see you as well. And thank you for your talk. It's, as always, very, very informative indeed. So I take it that in the context in which you're speaking, the term hate and hate speech is sort of an umbrella term.
That's exactly right.
It's covering lots and lots of different stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Horror speech, terror speech, contempt, rage, and so on. So there are going to be these, psychologically speaking, these sorts of differences in texture when we're looking at this sort of discourse. And I'm wondering if there's been any work on the relationship between these differences in texture and what sorts of interventions are most effective or appropriate. In other words, if we're not always talking about the same thing, if we're not homogenizing, then it seems to me that there is there's some advantage for considering the kind of hate speech that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And as you know, I have spent a lot of time bothering people about the broad, vague, disputed term hate speech, and trying to push for more specific, granular categories.
Sure. Yeah.
But your point about texture, I think, is a different one, as long as I understand what you mean by texture. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah. So hate speech, I'll use hate in this kind of technical sense, the umbrella sense. Say hate speech which is animated by terror.
Yeah.
Versus hate speech which is animated by contempt, right? To make a really crude distinction, right? So it seems to me intuitively in the one case, certain sorts of intervention, or let's even be more precise, certain sorts of counter speech are going to be effective and may not be effective in the other case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's impossible not to make that guess.
Yeah.
It makes so much intuitive sense.
Yeah.
So I'm entirely with you. And once again, longing for some study of it.
Yeah.
I
know the feeling.
What's so challenging, though, is that there will be a number of other variables always at play. For example, when you say hate speech, I think you use the term animated by rage or animated by other emotions. Then I would ask you, do you mean that the person who is posting or forwarding, the speaker, is feeling those emotions, or is it that the content seems to express them or display them or promote them? This is one of the arguments that I have with people about hate speech. We say hate speech. Whose hate is it? Do you mean that the person who's speaking hates, or that the person who's speaking is trying to make someone else hate or hate more? Or number three, are you saying that this is speech that is likely to make someone else feel hated, which we often miss?
Yeah.
All of those are very important possible understandings of the term hate speech, but as far as I know, they are never clarified. I also have been bothering people for years about, terrorist, and yesterday, most recently, there's a group in the UK that is trying to come up with a universal taxonomy of harmful speech. So, terrorist content is one of their for the moment is one of their categories. I said, terrorist content, are you kidding? That could be, I hope I wasn't, I hope I was more measured and polite. I certainly, tried to, that could mean beheading videos, which, by the way, will be received radically differently according to who's watching them.
Yeah.
Some of us will be left with an indelible, horrible memory, disgusting, horrible, terrifying memory that depresses us about humanity. Other people will be inspired to go and join ISIS.
Yeah.
And then various others. So that's just one kind of terrorist content. Another kind of terrorist content is the prototypical ISIS video showing how lovely it is to live among ISIS, showing the fighter playing with a kitten and so forth. Then a third kind would be terrorist, organizing terrorist attacks. A fourth kind would be transfers of money, which is arguably also terrorist content of one kind or another. So, your idea is terrific, and I think the texture point is a tremendously good one. I can't, in answer finally to your question, I can't think of any study of that specifically. People have tried to compare the effects of different forms of hate speech writ large, using different metrics like the apparent identity of the person posting it. Same thing with counter speech, by the way. Kevin Munger has a very interesting paper in which he got bots to rebuke people who were posting racist content and gave the bots white male identity when the people who had posted the content were apparently white males, and then gave them African-American identity. And he found that the responses, the apparent effect on the original poster was much better when the bot seemed to be a white man. You know, again, not surprising, but that's a very interesting paper in which he did A/B test it.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah, I'll be very interested in this paper. It's fascinating. I see another question from Christoph and Sebastian. Do you have another one? Or
Yes, if it's possible.
okay. Let's have Christoph and then you, unless others will jump in.
Q&A is always the best part. That's why I try to speak briefly.
Christoph.
Afternoon sun, kind of a glare here, but so I was wondering about the effectiveness of counter speech. That was a very interesting point, I thought, and it seems like a lot of these, and Sebastian said about people not using the hashtag anymore. So a lot of people say about the internet nowadays, it oftentimes has a more polarizing effect. It makes the whole hate speech phenomenon worse to try to do these counter speech campaigns. And a lot of times one of the issues that's being raised by people is that people are being put into boxes. So someone posts something and then the counter speech group automatically assumes that person is completely entrenched in that world of the subreddit. It shares all of the beliefs of the group identity, and then people say, well, I said this one thing, don't put me in this box. So that's an argument, it seems to me, is being brought up by both sides. So it could be left-leaning people, it could be right-leaning people, and what they are criticizing is that these campaigns of counter speech are not really cases of real communication. Me calling you out person to person, saying like that was not okay what you just said, it has a different effect because it's not actual communication, and that's something that is being brought up. It's not actual communication. You're not actually to me. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I think this is a tremendously important point. In fact, when my colleague wrote her paper on Joggerher, she referred to conversations, and I repeatedly questioned the use of that term. When someone from Joggerher responds to some post on Facebook, surely that we can't count that as a conversation. In particular, well, from my perspective, obviously, unless there is another response from the original poster. Since if you say something and then I say something, there hasn't necessarily been a real engagement, communicative engagement between us. But also, I thought, because the lack of a response leaves us without any indication that the original person has been affected by this counter speech. On the other hand, Christoph, the fact that our counter speakers say that they're not particularly interested in influencing the original poster means that either we study the effect that they seem to be having on the original posters, although that's not what they're trying to do, or it seems to me to make more sense to study the effect that they are having on the broader, wider audience. In part because, again, because that's what they're trying to do, but also, frankly, I am also more interested in that effect. That's where you would see a shift in discourse norms. So conceivably, you could still have this polarization in which the two groups are not influenced by one another and continue to despise one another. But you might still be interested in what the effect is on everybody else who's watching those exchanges. The people who the Yoga people or the Can Hear people regard as haters, plus the counter speakers, are still a tiny, all of them together are a tiny proportion of all of the people who are reading and posting online in those spaces. Does that make any sense?
It being a signal to others instead of the original poster. That is a good point. Yeah,
that's what they're trying to do. Yeah,
different communities have like different terminology for it. I mean, like a lot of people also call these various kinds of counter speech trolling. But, there we go. Battery dead.
Sorry. But you know, you could think of it almost like a soccer match in a large stadium. You know, most of us, of course, think about what the two teams are doing and how they're interacting with each other and where the ball is, you know. But it's a really quite different thing to study what's going on in the minds and behavior of all those people in the stands who are normally ignored, but much more numerous. If you're interested in discourse norms in society, then you care about the teams, the soccer players or football players, only for the effect that they are having on those people in the stands. I know it's a kind of a weird contrarian.
It's a wonderful metaphor, actually.
Yeah.
It's really kind of getting it to the heart.
You know, when we watch a football game, we watch the players. That's such a familiar notion.
Yeah, like the focus of the
yeah. It's also possible that in fact, it's very likely, coming back to Christoph's question, it is likely that if the players on the field are beating each other up, you know, and behaving badly in various ways, it would be a good guess that sort of behavior would spread to the stands, would spread to the spectators. So it's please don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that the behavior of those, if you like, players or protagonists is irrelevant. On the contrary, I want to know what effect it's having on those people in the stands.
Yeah. In particular, in the context of the horrible kind of effects with the England team losing. Anyway, Sebastian, you have the last word on the last question.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity for me to talk to you all. And I would be interested in your opinion on the following question. Do you think that we know better how to hate, although those speech types are kind of illicit to us, than to intervene like more civil? Do you think that, and should we train it, and what the skills should look like in those trainings? Because my experience is also during practical trainings with students in school and at university, that they know how to hate if I ask them to do so in a simulation, but they don't know how to react to it.
Wow, what a question. What a terrific last question. You know, I'm laughing at myself because I often point out that no human baby is born hating. And I argue, in fact, David and I have discussed this. Do you remember, David, in one of the first times we ever met, we discussed the question of whether hating is a hardwired human skill, you know. I hope I'm quoting you correctly, David, in saying you don't think so.
I don't know.
I also don't. I think the problem is that some very ill-intentioned human leaders are extremely good at teaching it. Because it is useful for them. It's a very unfortunately, it's a very effective way of getting people to cohere in a group. And again, people love that. That is hardwired in my view. And it's a very good way of getting people to stick more tightly to a leader. So I think it is unfortunately taught very well. And you know, the challenge is to teach the opposite. And I fear that some of our current efforts to teach the opposite can backfire because they are too idealized. They ask people to behave too civilly, too perfectly, too reasonably. Since after all, implicit in David's previous question was the fact that humans are pretty emotional. You know, we get quite fired up. I learned in another context that many different distressing emotions, human emotions, often have their expression or their outlet as anger. If someone feels afraid, often they seem angry. If someone feels embarrassed, often they seem angry. So I think that might be one reason, Sebastian, why your students find it so easy to hate. You know, it's very easy to express your frustration by taking it out on another person. After all, any of us who have parents or children or spouses, you know, must be familiar with that. This pickle, this problem of how to teach it is a very important one. And I think I will end, I know my time is up, by saying that I would be careful not to regard that only as a cyber literacy or cyber education challenge. I think it's a how to be a human being challenge and how to teach people, you know, how to be more resilient human beings and more calm and tolerant and reasonable and all those other good things. One of the methods that I have tested, I promise I'm ending with this, regarding what I call dangerous speech, you know, inflammatory speech designed to turn one group of people against another. One method I have tested, and we did get that evaluated, and it does seem promising, is to explain to people that this kind of speech is a tool used by leaders because it is a much easier, lazier way of getting people to follow them than actually solving the problems of those people. People also in general don't like to be duped. They don't like to be tricked. They don't like to feel that they are the, you know, what's the right word? That they've been used by someone else. And so there's a little bit of evidence that that kind of thing can be helpful.
Thank you so much.
That's a wonderful answer. And if I can kind of press it a bit longer, I'm wondering, is there hope that we can change the preconditions that facilitate that bad learning of those bad habits, as it were?
Absolutely, yes. I think it goes without saying that people are more susceptible to priming toward hatred and violence when they're afraid. It's one reason why I don't like the term hate speech. I think hate is not really the operative emotion, fear is.
Yeah.
And people are often afraid in ways that other people don't think are very sensible. For example, lots of people in my own country are terrified that someone is going to come and destroy them and their families and their culture. You know, this is the whole white supremacist thing. They are stockpiling gigantic arsenals of weapons and ammunition. I know such a guy, and to my amazement, he said to me once, you know, Susan, when the shit hits the fan, you will come and ask me for, I'm not kidding, this was completely real. You'll come and ask me for protection, and I will look after you. I couldn't believe it. But it was also frankly invaluable to me as a researcher, because I realized that this guy walks around all the time imagining that some other group of people are going to come and get him, and he's got to protect himself with his expletive deleted guns. Of course, I know that the guns won't protect him, et cetera, but he thinks so. He really thinks so. He believes these things. He's become convinced. Think of the last things that the man who committed the massacre at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, at the Tree of Life synagogue, posted online. He said, "I will no longer stand by while my people are," I think he used the term massacred, or while my people are being slaughtered by the filthy Jews and the filthy Muslims. It was the only time that the Jews and the Muslims were, you know, united in the mind of this horrifying guy. But he said, "I will no longer stand by while my people are being slaughtered." It's crazy to imagine that he really believed this. What slaughter was he talking about? But I think he believed it, as unfortunately do many others. So that needs unraveling, and of course it's tough.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and it's horrible to leave with that.
Sorry, yeah, but you know, the rest of the talk was designed to be encouraging.
Yeah, and we need to be realistic, and yeah, but it's so wonderful. So if there are no other questions, we have 4 minutes of break. So we are good on time, and a wonderful